Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Shrimp Tank Boston, where every week we get to bring you some of the brightest and best CEOs, owners, and entrepreneurs in and around the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts. I'm your co-host today, Ted Jenkin. Of course, my co-host Mark Scribner, coming to you every week with some dynamite entrepreneurs in and around Boston. In a few minutes, we're going to bring in our guest, Mike Masterson. He is the managing director of Breton Capital Management. And I have to tell you, when you want to talk about the real Shark Tank, not the shrimp tank, we're going to talk about it today with him. He's been in and around a lot of very successful businesses. And as always, if you're joining us for the first time right here on the Shrimp Tank, we really like to bring on entrepreneurs so we can talk about real life stories and give you this sort of crossroads of book smarts and street smarts. And you can learn the mistakes that we've all made as entrepreneurs. You can't be successful without failure and making those mistakes. So maybe you'll make less when you do your business venture if you learn from those of us who have learned through the school of hard knocks. As always, you can get a replay of all of our broadcasts at shrimptankpodcast.com. Just put /Boston. You can get, or boston.shrimptankpodcast.com. You can get all of the information. You can always go on to iHeartRadio. We're on the national platform. There's more than 100 million listeners on iHeartRadio. We've been doing great in their entrepreneur section. And you can go to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or anywhere around the internet to be able to hear this podcast. It's really exciting because the last several years now, as we've expanded cities into Seattle and Los Angeles and Boca Raton and Charleston, South Carolina, and even in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we're learning the stories of entrepreneurs and blue-collar businesses and white-collar business and finding that there's so many ways to make money and run a business. It's amazing. If you can find your lane, your niche, you can be really successful. So having done more than 1,200 interviews now, anywhere from guys like Tony Horton, who started P90X, to local business owners that have a heating and air conditioning company. It's been amazing to be able to tell these stories. And Mark, I thought before we got going with Mike today, it's interesting this week because between the House and the Senate, there's been all this hubbub around the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program. And finally, it looks like that they sort of loosened the noose a little bit on business owners here, which can end up being a pretty good thing. I mean, what do you think about this idea that the 2-year loan would now become a 5-year loan, and that it was only supposed to be 8 weeks and now it's going to potentially be 24 weeks? And the fact, especially for some restaurateurs out there, that as opposed to having this 75-25 split of payroll versus rent and utilities, that it's going to be 60-40 now, which gives people a little bit more breathing room. Do you think it was a good move by Congress here?
I think so. I mean, we're also going into that phase where they're trying to figure out the first part, which was the forgiveness part. So there's a lot of questions around how that part works, at least phase one. So a lot of questions and a lot of complications. And I don't know that the average person or business person has been able to even figure out one. So I'm worried about kind of morphing into two at the same time. But definitely there's certain sectors of the economy, definitely in the restaurants and the service industry, that have been impacted much more greatly than.
I'll tell you what, we look at this and it's just interesting. You're going to hear this word all the time now called pivot. And, businesses are always thinking about how they have to pivot, but it feels like the coronavirus has brought the pivot to basically the top of our coffee cup now, because if you're a business, that word pivot may mean you need to come up with new products and services to offer your clients in order to be able to be successful. I've seen breweries that are now in the hand sanitizing business. And it may also mean that you may have to think about how to get more efficient or effective with the business you have today, Mark. There are restaurants that may only be able to be at 25 or 50% of seating capacity. So without using their outdoor patio more effectively or getting a better curbside or to-go business, do you think all these businesses, Mark, will survive?
Well, the interesting thing, I'd say there's 40 million some odd people that are unemployed right now. And I've seen some of the deliberations in Congress where the thinking is, instead of paying like an extra $600 a week for stimuli. And so we're hearing a lot of the businesses can't get the people back because they're in some cases making more money being unemployed than actually going back to work. But there are some thoughts out there to actually pay people instead of paying not to work, incentivize them to go back to work by rewarding them, if you will, by going back to that employer. So,
Yeah,
so
it,
stimuli is great, but if there's no incentive to go back to work and you're making more money to stay at home, it really doesn't work all that well.
well, we'll certainly see if there's a phase 4 package here, whether it turns out that they extend the $600 a week into January, or is it going to be this other plan of paying people a bonus if they actually go back to work? That seems weird that you would pay people a bonus to go back to work, but it may end up being that way. But I wanted to bring in our guest today. Obviously, he's got a lot of experience in business, so curious about his thoughts, not just about business in general, but certainly these are really interesting times, Mike, business wise. And I wanted to ask you to start this is that, I don't know, I must have too many marbles loose in my head, and I'm always a glasses half full kind of person. Do you think for business owners now, as hard as it is it one of those times with 40 million people, like Mark mentioned, that are unemployed, and a lot of marketing outlets having to greatly reduce their marketing costs for billboards or TV or print? Isn't it the time to capitalize as an entrepreneur when you're in turmoil and chaos?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the wisdom always has been, the last thing to cut is advertising or marketing, right, in a downturn. And, that's being cut left and right. I'm not sure how that'll play out, but, you said some great points. You said pivot and also mistakes. And, these are sort of verbs that resonate for people who are struggling right now. And there's a huge dimension divide in businesses, right? If you're cash flow driven, you have one set of problems. If you're investor backed, venture backed, you have another set of challenges. Most of the 40 million you're talking about, or we're talking about here, are restaurant based, cash flow driven. The PPP does not do much for these people. It gives them a couple of weeks of cash flow on a loan basis. To your point, Mark, there is a loss of incentive to come back. I would say don't, for sure, it was worth doing politically, but I'm not sure it's really helping these businesses because they're so day-to-day cash flow driven. And to rebound out of that hole, you need cash, not 2 weeks of cash. You need 3 months of cash. And that's the delta that this is emerging here. And so I think that 40 million is going to be kind of a resilient trough to come up out of, my view.
I was going to ask you, it's interesting to me, and I'm curious because you see so many businesses and profit and loss statements, but one thing this coronavirus exposed is how many small business owners that have under 10 employees did not have a cash reserve, which would seem so fundamental in business. Why do so many business owners still basically running their businesses hand to mouth and not having a cash reserve? Why is that?
It's unbelievable. And, my career, my father was an accountant, and I grew up, I would see him, doing the books for the local guy who, laying cable, putting in driveways. And I saw forever these guys coming in saying, well, I didn't pay my payroll taxes. Is that a problem? And, right off, because I don't have enough cash. So really, I mean, at that, if that's the business you're in, you have to have the instincts for cash flow. Otherwise, you are going to be, another, statistics. And I totally agree with you on that, Ted. That should probably be one of the first lessons if you want to be an entrepreneur, is to make sure that, you have instincts on cash flow.
Mike, to follow up on Ted's question, do you see blood in the water where there are a lot of businesses and market share that's available? When you shake the trees, are you seeing opportunity, or are you seeing a recoil?
I do see opportunity, Mark, but I see it on the investment side. I think the pivot that Ted mentioned before for the cash flow driven businesses, I think it's going to be tough. And the unemployment, I think, will, be pretty resilient from that perspective. On the investor side, I think markets, because of the pivot, there will be opportunities in markets and products and services, but the world has changed from, growth investing to, profit investing. That's the biggest change.
We're sitting here, everyone, with Mike Masterson, who's the managing director of Breton Capital Management. I mean, so many years of experience in dealing with businesses and exits and seeing all sorts of companies be very successful. I was wondering, as you talk to the small business owner that may be watching the program today, that a lot of them struggle and fail because they're undercapitalized. And as you think about moving through this new norm, when is an entrepreneur better off getting a loan, maybe from the SBA like they have now of up to $2 million versus raising capital and giving away their equity? How do I know if I'm an owner when to give away equity or sell equity, or just when to take a loan and do it myself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, being undercapitalized is probably the norm, for most businesses. And from my view, the top priority is to get sustainably capitalized, right? Number one, forget, whether you're getting diluted, whether you got to give up some ownership. I mean, so many entrepreneurs are hung up on dilution. They're hung up on, 51% versus 49%. You have investors, you have governance, and, you have bylaws. So first priority is to get capitalized sustainably. And I think, that's what I advise entrepreneurs. On the cash flow side for the small businesses, it's hard, right? It's hard to put 2 or 3 months of cash flow, under the, as a buffer. And I totally get that. But you have to have, some kind of buffer to get you through the hiccups, whether you're collecting the money or whether you're paying out the money. And I think this is an area that, unfortunately, as you pointed out, Ted, is a massive weak spot for, especially for smaller businesses.
Mike, you seem to travel. The typical like private equity investor is may not be familiar with some of the people listening to the show, but it seems like the types of projects and investments that you travel in are just slightly below that. I don't know if you'd call it angel investing, or could you maybe describe a little bit about what your process is when you meet that business or product or concept that you want to invest in?
Sure. In my world, there's probably 3 buckets. One's a cash flow driven company. They can go to the bank. They can mortgage their houses. They can do that type of thing. The other extreme is private equity, which wants to put money into ownership, but they have low risk and to pull cash out of that to pay themselves. So that's a more predictable world. In the middle of that is venture, right? And this is a place where you take technology, for example, early stage technology that hasn't been commercialized, and you place a bet on the commercialization potential of that intellectual property and also the team. So the risk is higher, but you're in earlier, and the rewards can be higher as well.
There are a lot of people watching today that probably watch everyone's favorite entrepreneur show, the Shark Tank. And they obviously see Mark Cuban and Mr. Wonderful, and they make these deals. But not many people have actually pitched their idea to a private equity company. So if I had a business and I was thinking about actually approaching a private equity company, would there be things that I need to do today to get myself prepared for that meeting? Because it's not like TV, is it? You're not there for 4 minutes in a sales pitch, or is it that way in front of a private equity company?
Yeah, I think what you want to do is come to their investors with as much, validation of your vision as possible. And there's some easy ways to do it. You can go out and get an SBIR loan, right? You can apply for those types of grants. That's non-dilutive capital. You obviously can get strategic investors where they'll put money into the development of your product or your platform. That's always a great validator. They're a customer and an investor. And then if you can put together, an initial team of advisors who are experienced, and bring that aggregate package to professional investors, I think those are great steps. And I also think you have to send the signal that you're willing to bring on a board of investors, to bring on those investors to partner with you into the future. To go to these meetings with my way or the highway, you're really not going to make a lot of progress. So, I think those things, Ted, are something to think about before you decide to line up a meeting.
I want to, Mark, I was going to say, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question here because I think we'd be really interested on the shrimp tank today. We love talking to entrepreneurs, but since you invest in so many businesses and see so many businesses, now that the coronavirus has passed, it's clear that there are going to be new norms. And one of the new norms that can be exciting and maybe scary at the same point is the idea of the worker working from home. And it was happening anyway, but this obviously has accelerated the amount of people that might work at home permanently. What kind of long-lasting effects do you see this having on the commercial real estate market? And what kind of long-lasting effects do you see it having on company culture? Can you really build a culture in your company if every employee is working in their pajamas and slippers at home?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? I think there's pockets that will benefit from or be able to adjust to the new norm, with innovation and culture building initiatives. And I think there are other, markets that, are going to be, it's going to be more difficult. For the world I live in, right, which is technology, innovation, biotech, this type of thing. Collaboration is absolutely essential. I mean, so, I think they can go so far with Zoom meetings, et cetera, but that's a world where scientists really need to figure out how to collaborate. And, the person-to-person interaction there, I think they have to get back to at some level. We invested in a company called Easy Cater, which is an awesome company, but Stefania Nappi, the CEO, is a great CEO, but clearly, they were business to business. They were catering for businesses, right? And so back to your commercial real estate question, commercial real estate and their leaseholders have all gone home. So it's going to be interesting for us personally on our side to see, how those tenants come back, how those companies come back into those spaces, and from a catering perspective, we're obviously interested as well. So I think there's a few different markets. Ted, that will have different impact, and some worse than others.
Yeah, I saw this past week, Google announced that they were giving $1,000 stipend for people who needed furniture at home to work from home. So I think there's going to be a dichotomy there for sure. Mike, when you're out traveling, we talked a little bit about the space that you operate in, being in the VC venture space. How does people or investors find those avenues? Or we're blessed being in Massachusetts with the MITs, the Harvards of the world, and biopharm and research and all those great types of networks. But how would someone find a person like yourself to be pitched for an investment? Or did you have any suggestions on how that would work?
Yeah, I think that's another sort of process that's been changing, interestingly enough. And I'm old enough to just question how that's happening, but clearly, the past way of doing that was contacts, right? Your network, find somebody to give you a warm introduction, and that was the path to pitching. What I found, especially from Breton Capital's perspective, we get hit with, a number of cold calls. And I've talked to people recently saying, how can that work? But they're saying that's getting traction, just an absolute cold call, over LinkedIn or, some social media site. And that is actually getting traction in terms of connecting with investors. I'm a little surprised at that, but that seems to be another process that's emerged post-pandemic. But my recommendation is never underestimate the network effect if you have it.
A lot of entrepreneurs that are watching today, it's pretty easy to enter a business from this aspect that you have an idea, you have a dream, you think everyone's going to just love what you have, the product or service, and you get started. But I think it's really difficult for somebody to know when to exit. So what would you advise people watching today about at least some framework to be thinking about? Like, how do I know when the right time is to exit? Because I feel maybe even now at the recent downturn, there are some business owners that didn't exit that could have. That private equity company was chasing them, that wanted the veterinarian clinics. They wanted the HVAC company, and it's like, oh, I'm going to do better. And now all of a sudden your business is worth half of what it was. So what kind of advice would you give an entrepreneur that's watching?
Yeah, and I think, that's an absolute great point. I think the best advice is, minimally be aware that times change. So the environment you were in 3 years ago, when things were going fantastic, all your customers were buying, investors were lining up to invest. Just get up in the morning and be paranoid and say to yourself, this environment is not sustainable. And then from there, you can, say, all right, what do I want to do personally? Do I want to build a legacy company, perhaps a lifestyle company, perhaps a generational, handoff company? What's your goal? And then from there, I think, you decide to make your moves. You can be opportunistic. Somebody's going to swoop in and buy you. Or that you'll be on the lookout for, a great exit for you and for your employees. And I think those are very fluid situations. My own approach to it has been, particularly if there's leverage in your company, that you keep an eye out for the exit. The leverage on a CEO, the financial leverage on a CEO can weigh you down, and it can also put your position in jeopardy. When a highly leveraged investor-backed company that is underperforming puts the CEO, in the hot seat. So you got to be ready if you decide to stay.
Yeah.
That's why I look like I look. Been in a few of those seats. So just to wrap that, Ted, just a, long-winded point there, but, if you have financial strength and you have a vision and a desire to build a sustainable company, I recommend build your financial strength. If you want to bring in investors, you want to get leverage, and you want to go for growth, then be aware that that has challenges as well.
From Mike, from your seat right now, we talked about the opportunities and some of the changes, but what do you think is a really great area to be focusing on right now? What do you feel, other than your existing companies that you've invested in? Obviously, that's a lot of work, and you're staying on top of that. But if you could just have a pile of capital right now, where would you be excited about?
I mean, I would pick off. I guess there's two areas. One is, software platforms that can be leveraged into multi-market opportunities, sort of SaaS business models, where you can grow and you can have nonlinear growth without adding headcount. I keep an eye out for that world as well. And under the hood there is AI and this type of thing. The other side, I think is biotech. I think that's got a huge upside. And then that's a world where it's go for the gold, right? You're not going to measure profitability anytime soon in most of those plays, but the immunotherapy, cell engineering platforms that have emerged, which can tweak DNA and RNA for specific diseases, I think has a long run. I think big pharma needs those, products to get to market to sustain their business model. So I'd say those two areas generally, Mark, are, what I keep an eye out for opportunistically.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up, Ted, if it's all right. In the wealth management world, typically they'll compare how well someone did, over, let's say, the S&P, how many basis points over, there's rating systems for managers and stuff like that. But what is a batting average in your space that's considered, the norm or successful? I mean, I'm sure it's all over the spectrum, but, if you invest in 10 opportunities, or 9 failing and 1's working, or tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, and there's different types of investing philosophy. The Kleiners of the world, Flagship. I mean, they're placing, or Andreessen, they're placing bets. They spread their risk, right? So they can live with 2 and 10, or 3 and 10, right? But it's it's like baseball, right? 300. We are, have a lower number of at bats. So we have to get our number up over half. And,
Wow.
that's where we've been able to do that. But again, we are, have a not more selective, but we place less bets, and we get highly involved with our customers, and we get in our founders, and we get in very early. We have the ability to use the word, Ted, to pivot or tweak the business model as we go along, as customers bring us feedback. So, I'd say our returns are probably, we go for higher returns, right? So we go for in excess of 10x because we're in so early. And I think, but I would say the norm out there is if you're going 3 and 10, that's a pretty good day, for that world, right? Not PE, but for venture. Which, by the way, Mike, the other place we've been involved with is the fintech products, which I kind of, package as a software play. Obviously, that's hot as a pistol, and the Robin Hoods and these types of things are, you guys know that world well as well. But we see that we've been involved with that investment-wise as well.
Yeah, we were thinking that Max Headroom was way ahead of his time. So now it's going to come back here somewhere. The Max Headroom advisor, probably.
Yeah. You claim that one.
Well, I wanted to shift gears and get into our hot or not section, which is asking you some questions just about entrepreneurship in general. I mean, obviously, you built businesses, you bought businesses, you've seen so many things out there. And, the small business owner that's starting and again has 5, 10, 15 employees. One of my first hot or nots is, what do you think about people hiring family members? Is it a hot or not to hire family members? What have you seen in terms of the pros and cons?
I have no issues with it. I think it's it can be, family dynamics can get in the way. But I think you have to look at every situation differently. But I would say the advice is not to do it. Just like don't lend your family members any money. But my own family is a great family, and I would hire them in a heartbeat. But I think that's right, Ted. The instincts are you have to think about how you're going to unpack the situation if you have to, right? You have to think of the downside. So that means you have to fire your family member and you have to lay them off. If you sell the company, what happens? I think that's how I think of it. Not just the upside, isn't this great, but how am I going to unpack this thing if things go south? And that would be my advice to anybody thinking of hiring a family member.
Yeah, so I'm going to follow up, Ted. We covered a little bit about hot or not investing in commercial real estate in Massachusetts. Let's be specific on that.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, everybody was killing that market, right? I mean, we all have friends who are just, have had great 10-year runs in commercial real estate. My own, sort of toe in the water there is in San Diego. But I think that the commercial real estate players, make money going up and make money coming down as advisors. The owners, I think they'll figure it out. Some hybrid system between, as we're doing Zoom, but also bring people back in. As an investor, I don't think I'd be jumping into commercial real estate right now. I don't know if the numbers have come down at all, but it seems like it's going to be on a customer side as well as a liquidity side. There might be challenges. There might be overcapacity. But in Boston, it's still on the streets. It's still hot. I don't know what you're seeing, Mark, but my friends are still saying it's full steam ahead.
Wow.
Cranes aren't coming down yet.
And that just points to the market versus, what's the unemployment, right? I mean, trying to put those two variables together is also challenging. So
we had heard that lobster prices were down 50% because none of it could get shipped out for the Chinese New Year. Does that mean No Names is making no money now, or what? Isn't that like the Big Lobster place that just put a bib around your neck? I wonder, do you think the restaurants will survive here, or do you think most of them are going to go out of business?
By the way, the No Name went out of business.
No Names went out of business?
It's gone. Sorry, Ted. It's gone. Yeah. Yeah. They owed about $800,000 in back taxes to the city, but
Jimmy's Harbor Side was out. No Names is out. What happened to all the restaurants as the seaport went in there and killed them all?
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of friends in the restaurant business, not just Main Street stuff, but across the nation. And I think this is a place where you're just going to need some capital to hang around. The Main Street types of places, No Names, I think are going to have to come out of this with obviously a different business model, and how those costs get passed on to the consumer, I think is going to be an interesting phenomena. Plus people are getting used to staying at home or ordering takeout. I just think for myself, we have a local place, around the corner here. We're in it every Friday night, and I'll probably go back. But I'm just saying, I think it's going to be a tough one there, Ted. It's just a tough business model, right? Half the capacity, the price point's got to go up. All of those are really sensitive spots to the consumer.
You think it's the same is true for the movie business? There are all these studio time grills where they basically put in your home movie theater into the regular movie theater, and then they were serving a meal, and it seemed like a great business model. And then it seems like this coronavirus really did put the virus on that movie business. And do you see that ever returning?
Well, I don't know if you saw, but AMC, right, just went out of business.
They did go out of business, huh?
Yeah, the movie chain.
Wow.
I was reading somewhere
What's that?
Just joined that membership.
Did you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was reading there was an optimal bundle of of entertainment that you should buy, right? Amazon, Disney, Netflix, and I think Hulu, right? And that's the package people will buy. And I think that's going to carry the day. People are just going to find their way forward, in that world with food bolted on somehow.
Mike, I have a hot or not for you. College education or not?
I say it's a definite yes, with an asterisk. I think you've got to, the students have to be able to package up whatever learning process they have, whether it's going to be virtual or in classroom or hybrid. They've got to bolt on some kind of experience, right? The school, that I'm on the board, I'm chairing, is with Wentworth and Northeastern as well. They do an excellent job at, combining the experience with the learning. I think that is the combination that has to resonate in order for parents to pay, the price that they're paying. I do not think higher ed will retreat to 100% virtual, but I do think, higher ed will have to adjust their price points somehow, and it's a massive battle right now. Most of the business model only has one source of revenue, and that's tuition. And when that gets challenged, the whole business model gets challenged. But I think they'll find a way, Mark, down the middle here, at least while the pandemic is a threat.
Definitely not cheap. Boston College, I think, was maybe $75,000 all in with housing and everything this year. So much is made in every field now about being on social media. How important do you think it is for brands today to not only do the traditional marketing that they were doing for lead generation, but to spend the money to brand themselves within these social media platforms?
Boy, how important is that, huh? I mean, the barrier to entry for branding is zero, right? So how do you come into that and emerge, above all the chaos, and battling for, some attention, the user's attention. I mean, that's it, right? That's the challenge right there. And there's a lot of people out there who are great at that. I first became sensitized to that whole thing when we were trying to move through Google, and you could see all the tiers of prices, charged to move up the pyramid for exposure. But I think as the power of social media and the tools there, has emerged and it's going to become even greater, your branding strategy is everything. And if you can figure that one out, I think it's a huge value add to your company, not only for you to get out there, but if you're trying to get positioned to be bought or liquidate or raise money, it's a key part of the strategy.
I mean, Mike, is there any truth that, because people always, you can buy businesses or sell businesses based upon, revenue or based upon EBITDA, but, a lot of owners may always wonder what's the multiplicative effect of having a brand. And it's challenging because, that goodwill, or, obviously there are big companies like Dunkin' Donuts that have a brand.
Yep.
Is it worth it for a business owner to do that? Like, could it add, like you bought businesses, a multiplicative effect at a sale?
I personally think brand is important. I think that investors do, a pretty good job at trying to figure out whether they're buying a good asset or not. I think the tangible way to go at it, deterministic ways, you can look at the financials, you can look at intellectual property, you can look at those assets and measure it. But it's pretty, you still have a delta out there of uncertainty when you're buying something. And I think that's where the brand, is the tipping point of an acquisition or an investor. And it's not on your balance sheet, so you're not going to get paid for it, but it will put you above the fray. We see this with strategic investors, huge global companies that, are everywhere. At the end of the day, they end up picking up companies where the tipping point is, who has done it, who has a better brand. And so it does make a difference. I think you have to pay attention to it.
Yeah, like the J. Crews of the world. Yeah, there's I can see a lot of that. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, we were involved with a company, and one of the strategics was Volkswagen. Right now, Volkswagen is, they got caught up in Dieselgate, and their world is they need some positive news, right? Adding on to their drive towards e-vehicles, and so part of their decision making is not only technology, not only people, but how does this fit into our overarching strategy to move away from Dieselgate and into the future of e-vehicles, against Tesla and this type of thing. I mean, Tesla's a great example. I think Musk is an awesome example of brand. I mean, the bottom line for Tesla is disastrous. The stock skyrocketed, and Musk is the guy, and he's put a brand on Tesla as the leader. So it obviously makes a difference, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you here. I think it's interesting for our viewers today. There are a decision that sometimes an owner has to make, like, should I join a YPO or an EO or a Vistage, or am I better off getting an advisory board and getting a few people to basically consult me and maybe giving them a piece of the company along the way? Do you see it better or worse in any of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think, for me personally, a mentor or a close advisor, was always a thing to have, just to get an independent view. The YPO and those organizations, I think, are great because you can listen to what other CEOs are struggling with. And the conclusion is, hey, I'm not as bad off as they thought, and, everybody's got the same issues. So that's more of a peer-to-peer, I think, type of network, which is great. But I do like the mentor advisor sort of network as well. I think it's invaluable for one-on-one discussions, and So, I would recommend, doing both if you can. There's nothing better, I have to say, than talking to another peer, another CEO who is, going through the same thing. That is, that's helpful too.
Well, I thought, as we spend the last 5 or 10 minutes on our podcast, this has been great information, by the way. Everybody, we're talking to Mike Masterson, who is the managing director of Breton Capital Management, but he's been involved in names that you would know when you talk to him, learn more about him in big companies, private equity, and just an amazing background, even with the Harvard Business School. There's so much that you've done in the business. So we get to a little section here we call Plead the Fifth. I guess you get to plead the fifth once, but we've never asked anything would be that incriminating. So I'd start off in here, and I'm going to ask you, was the Big Dig a success or not?
Well, one of my favorite characters of all time was Tip O'Neill. So they named it after him, and I'm checking it off as a success. Plus, every time I've been gunning the Logan, it's got me there on time. So, Ted, I'm really not taking the big picture there. It's all about me, and it's been good for me.
No tickets. I'll give you a plead the flip. Trade, the Brady trade, good or bad?
I like it. I think it was a great move for both sides. And I think it's going to be great to watch Brady and Gronk down there in Tampa. It's going to be a rough year for sports in general. So even with the Sox, right? I mean, to trade Mookie and this type of thing, I think unloading your payroll this year was the time to do it if you were going to do it. So looks good for the Pats as well. And
what happened to the Duckpin bowling that used to be underneath Fenway Park? Did they get rid of it or no? Is it still there? The candlestick bowling. I remember I used to go to that, and
that's Ted, you're uncovering some New England stuff right there. Candlepin bowling with the softball size, bowling balls. That's old school right there, boy.
This is the time when they had Narcissus was down there in Kenmore Square. It was like the big dance club, and Uno Pizzeria might still be there, but they had there's nothing like candlestick bowling after a couple of beers. You can hurl that thing down there pretty good.
Well, I'll give you the plead the fifth, Ted. Have you ever been in the Boston College Library?
I was in the
It's a joke. It's
library.
A joke. I mean, you're down there bowling, and just wondering if you ever saw any part of the campus.
I probably spent more time in Mary Ann's down there when it was a bar than I did the Tip O'Neill Library.
Yeah. Well, Mary Ann's is still there, so that's good. But that's a great question.
How about a hot or not, which is in here called like a plead the fifth. I'm just curious, when you talk about incorporating businesses, sometimes people hear that they should do this in like Delaware or Nevada. Is it really just all a bunch of shenanigans, or does it matter where you incorporate your business?
No, I think it matters. I mean, I think you have to just try to get into the, most flexible legal framework you can find. That's not only good for your company, but it's good for your investors. Investors are clearly comfortable with Delaware, so that's helpful. If you want, if that's not a concern and you're really running your own business, cash driven, an LLC is a nice spot, to land, and that can be, anywhere, right? You don't gain anything from different states there, except tax wise. So cash flow driven, LLC, sophisticated investor, Delaware. Nevada is, obviously probably tax friendly as well. But mostly what I see is, from an investor perspective, is Delaware or the state they're coming out of. And the new tax laws, right, drops the top line losses or gains right through. So you can do a lot with, an LLC structure there from a tax perspective individually.
I'm going to tag one on there too. Hot or not, economic opportunity zones.
Economic opportunity stimulus?
Zones,
Yeah, honestly, I know it's being really billed as or people are critical of it, right, as a steal, but if you can go into a place around here like Worcester, Springfield, or something, and you can jumpstart some economic activity, I have no problems giving away a tax a tax savings on that. I think it's a pretty interesting initiative. I know that's a contrarian view, it seems, but I kind of like it, Mark. And hopefully it might pay off in, some kind of economic jumpstart.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, I wanted to say a personal thanks for taking time out of your busy calendar to come on the Shrimp Tank today. I just think the advice you gave today is invaluable, not only for the seasoned entrepreneur, which there's great information in here, but if you're an entrepreneur that has a business with 5 or 10 employees and you're thinking about growing, you need to rewatch what we talked about today, because there are a lot of little nuggets in here that can really help you not only take your business to the next level, but give you some constructive thinking about how you build that business one day when you exit. So people that are watching the broadcast today, if they want to learn more about Breton Capital Management or your background, maybe they might need to pitch their business to your company. How can they get more information about you and the capital management company?
Yeah, I would just say email address mmasterson@bretoncapital.com is the most direct. And it's been great talking to you, Ted, you and Mark. I think it's a great format you have here. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks so much. And folks, for joining us here on the podcast this week, or I guess we're calling it the Zoomcast right now, not really a podcast today. You can always go to boston.shrimptankpodcast.com, get all the information, or just go to shrimptankpodcast.com and click Boston to see all the interviews that we've done in the Boston marketplace and all the interviews that we've done on the Shrimp Tank. As always, you can download us at the Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you can find us on the internet. But the easiest thing to do is go on the iHeart app and just basically go on to iHeart, click Entrepreneur section, and then just download the Shrimp Tank. Think about this. You can literally get more than a college education when you're out and about, either taking a walk, or if you happen to be in the car, stuck in traffic, why listen to the radio when you can listen to successful entrepreneurs, and that can help you build your business even quicker. I thought maybe we were going to have Tom Brady on the show next week, or no? We're not.
I'm going to get Drew Bledsoe. Is that okay?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We are so excited to continue to interview entrepreneurs here right on the Shrimp Tank, and look forward to seeing you next week and talking more about book smarts, street smarts, and how to become a better entrepreneur.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in a shrimp tank.